A billionaire found a young orphan girl hiding on his yacht and decided to take her to his mansion. Days later, he cried upon discovering what she had done to his blind wife. The morning sun danced on the calm waters of the Pacific as Richard Harding, a distinguished 60-year-old with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, paced the deck of his luxurious yacht, the Serenity. His steps were firm, yet his face betrayed a weariness that hinted at a deeper melancholy. He checked his platinum Rolex, a constant reminder of time, his ally in business, but seemingly his foe in his personal life. "All set, Mr. Harding," the captain announced, interrupting his reverie. "We'll be underway in an hour." Richard nodded, his mind drifting to the heated argument he'd had with Elizabeth, his wife, the night before. Once again, he'd chosen work over her. Once again, he was escaping to the solace of the sea. Or was it peace he sought? "Thank you, Captain Jones. Shall just make a final check of my cabin before we depart," Richard replied, his voice heavy with the weight of past decisions. Meanwhile, miles away, in a group home on the outskirts of San Diego, a 12-year-old girl hunched over a laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Olivia, with her unruly brown hair and intense green eyes, bit her lip in concentration. Images of Richard Harding and his blind wife, Elizabeth, flashed across the screen. "It has to be him," Olivia murmured, scribbling furiously in a worn notebook. "It's my only chance." The group home's dinner bell rang, signaling mealtime. Olivia quickly closed the browser windows, tucked her notes into a faded backpack, and hurried out, her heart pounding not with haste, but with the weight of her decision. Back on the Serenity, Richard entered his private cabin, a sanctuary of polished teak and soft leather that smelled of affluence and solitude. He poured himself a finger of scotch, something he rarely did so early in the day, but today it felt necessary. As he turned towards the panoramic window, a flicker of movement in the glass's reflection made him freeze. "Who's there?" he demanded, whirling around. Silence was his only initial response. Then, from behind a plush leather armchair, a small figure emerged. Olivia, her eyes wide with fear yet gleaming with determination, stepped forward. "Please don't send me away," she pleaded, her voice trembling slightly. Richard was taken aback. In all his years at sea, he'd never encountered a situation quite like this. His business mind immediately calculated the risks and complications. "How did you get in here?" "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a blend of authority and curiosity. Olivia clutched a small, worn satchel to her chest. I needed to talk to you. It's important. Please, just let me explain." Richard studied the girl. His instincts screamed to call security. But something in her eyes, a desperate plea mixed with unwavering hope, gave him pause. "You have 5 minutes," he said, sitting down and gesturing to the chair opposite him. Olivia took a deep breath and began to speak. She told him about the group home, about her research, about how she believed Richard was her only hope. She spoke of Elizabeth, Richard's blind wife, with an insight that made him wonder how a child could know so much. As Olivia spoke, Richard felt his well-ordered world begin to unravel. Every word was a challenge to the carefully constructed walls he'd built around himself, the routine, the control, the emotional distance. "And that's why I need your help," Olivia concluded, her eyes pleading. Richard rose and walked to the window, staring out at the bustling harbor. His mind raced. Taking this girl in would mean complications, risks, a complete disruption to his meticulously planned life. But leaving her behind, he turned back to Olivia, who watched him with a mixture of fear and hope. In that moment, Richard saw not just a desperate child, but a reflection of something he'd long ago lost: compassion, purpose, the ability to make a difference beyond the figures on a spreadsheet. "Captain Jones," Richard called, his decision made. The captain appeared almost instantly. "Yes, Mr. Harding?" "Change of plans. We're returning to the mansion." "And," he paused, glancing at Olivia, "prepare a guest room. We have company." As the yacht altered course, Richard felt a weight settle upon him, the weight of a truly significant decision, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Looking at Olivia, who now offered a tentative smile, he realized his solitary voyage had transformed into something far more meaningful. Richard's internal conflict was only just beginning. His structured, predictable business life was about to collide with a long-dormant impulse, the desire to make a real difference in someone's life. As the Serenity sailed back towards the harbor, Richard Harding, the implacable billionaire, took the first step on a journey that would change not only Olivia's life, but his own, in ways he could scarcely imagine. Chapter 2. Arrival at Harding Manor. Richard's limousine wound its way up the long, tree-lined driveway leading to Harding Manor, perched atop a hill overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Olivia, seated in the back, pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide with wonder at the magnificence of the estate unfolding before her. It's like a castle," she whispered, more to herself than to Richard. Richard observed the girl through the rearview mirror, a faint smile playing on his lips. Well, not exactly a castle, but Elizabeth always liked to call it that. At the mention of his wife's name, Richard's expression turned serious again. He still hadn't figured out how to explain Olivia's presence to Elizabeth. The past few hours on the yacht had been a blur of gentle questioning and hurried planning, but now, as they neared home, the reality of the situation began to sink in. The car pulled up to the grand entrance of the manor. Richard took a deep breath before stepping out and opening the door for Olivia. "Remember what we agreed," he said in a low voice. "For now, you're the daughter of an old friend who needs a place to stay for a few weeks." Olivia nodded, clutching her worn satchel tightly. Together, they ascended the marble steps to the front door. Before Richard could reach for the doorbell, the door swung open, revealing Mrs. Davis, the Harding family's trusted housekeeper. A middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a kind face, Mrs. Davis immediately noticed Olivia's presence. "Mr. Harding, we weren't expecting you back so soon," she said, her gaze shifting between Richard and the girl. "And who is this young lady?" Richard placed a protective hand on Olivia's shoulder. "Mrs. Davis, this is Olivia. She'll be staying with us for a while. Please prepare the guest room in the East Wing." Mrs. Davis nodded, though her expression betrayed a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Of course, sir. Mrs. Harding is in the music room. Shall I inform her of your arrival?" "No, thank you, Mrs. Davis. I'll speak with her myself," Richard replied, guiding Olivia inside. As they crossed the grand foyer, Olivia couldn't contain her amazement. Her eyes darted from the sparkling crystal chandeliers to the oil paintings adorning the walls and the antique furniture that seemed to whisper stories of centuries past. Richard led her into a lavishly decorated living room. "Wait here for a moment," he instructed, his voice gentle but firm. "I need to speak with my wife first." Olivia nodded, perching tentatively on the edge of a velvet sofa. As soon as Richard left, however, she rose, unable to contain her curiosity. Her eyes were drawn to a series of framed photographs on the mantelpiece. In one, Elizabeth smiled radiantly, her blue eyes sparkling with life and joy. It was a picture from before the accident, Olivia realized, a pang of sadness hitting her. In another photo, Richard and Elizabeth stood hand in hand in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, looking so happy and carefree. Meanwhile, Richard entered the music room, where the soft strains of a piano filled the air. Elizabeth, seated at the instrument, her hands gliding gracefully over the keys, stopped playing as she sensed her husband's presence. "Richard," she called, turning towards the doorway. "I thought you were on the yacht." Richard approached, taking Elizabeth's hands in his. "There's been a change of plans, my dear. We have a guest." Elizabeth frowned, confused. "A guest?" Richard hesitated before continuing. "Her name is Olivia. She's the daughter of an old friend. She needs a place to stay for a few weeks." Elizabeth was silent for a moment, processing the information. When she spoke, her voice was cautious. "Oh, this is rather sudden, Richard. Why didn't you consult me first?" "It was a last-minute decision," Richard replied, feeling the weight of his half-truth. "Believe me, Elizabeth, it's important." Elizabeth sighed, her fingers drumming lightly on the piano keys. "Very well, where is she?" Richard gently guided Elizabeth out of the music room. As they entered the living room, they found Olivia still engrossed in the photographs. "Olivia," Richard called softly, causing the girl to turn quickly. "This is my wife," Elizabeth. Olivia approached hesitantly, her eyes fixed on the elegant woman before her. Elizabeth, sensing the girl's presence, extended her hand. "Hello, Olivia," Elizabeth said, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "Welcome to our home." Olivia took Elizabeth's hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Mrs. Harding." Just then, Mrs. Davis entered the room. "The guest room is ready, Mr. Harding." Richard nodded gratefully. "Olivia, why don't you go with Mrs. Davis? She'll show you to your room." As Olivia followed Mrs. Davis upstairs, Richard and Elizabeth remained in the living room, a tense silence hanging between them. "There's something you're not telling me, Richard," Elizabeth finally said, her voice calm but firm. Richard sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "It's complicated, Elizabeth. I promise to explain everything soon." Upstairs, Mrs. Davis opened the door to a spacious and elegantly furnished room. "Here we are, dear. I hope you'll be comfortable." Olivia stepped inside hesitantly, her eyes taking in the luxurious surroundings. "It's beautiful, thank you," she murmured. As soon as Mrs. Davis left, closing the door behind her, Olivia rushed to the bed. Glancing around to make sure she was alone, she opened her worn satchel. From within, she retrieved a notebook, some photographs, and a small, homemade electronic device. Carefully, Olivia hid the items at the bottom of a dresser drawer, covering them with clothes Mrs. Davis had left for her. Her fingers brushed against the device one last time before closing the drawer. "It'll work," she whispered to herself, a mixture of determination and fear in her voice. "It has to." Meanwhile, downstairs, Elizabeth sat down at the piano once more, her fingers playing a melancholic melody. Her mind drifted back to the accident 5 years ago. The screech of tires, the sudden impact, and then darkness. The mystery of that night still haunted her, as it did Richard. As night fell upon Harding Manor, each of its occupants, Richard, Elizabeth, Olivia, and even the observant Mrs. Davis, felt that something significant had shifted. A new dynamic was forming, bringing with it secrets, hopes, and fears that would soon surface, forever altering the course of their lives. The days at Harding Manor flowed with a gentle rhythm, yet beneath the surface, a subtle tension simmered. Olivia, with her quiet presence and observant eyes, gradually became a part of the household routine. Her mornings were filled with private tutoring arranged by Richard, while afternoons often found her in Elizabeth's company, listening to stories or assisting with small tasks. One particularly sunny afternoon, Elizabeth sat in the garden, her skilled hands shaping clay on a pottery wheel. Olivia watched, fascinated. "How do you know what you're doing if you can't see?" Olivia asked, her voice full of genuine curiosity. Elizabeth smiled, her fingers never ceasing their delicate work. "It's all about feeling, dear. My hands have become my eyes." Olivia absorbed these words, her mind flashing back to the lessons she had learned at the group home. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memories flow. Flashback. The group home was a place of cold corridors and wilting hopes, but in the small back garden, Olivia found a sanctuary. There, seated on a weathered bench, was Mr. Chen, an elderly man with wrinkled eyes that held a deep well of wisdom. "Olivia, my dear," he called, sensing her presence. "Ready for another lesson?" Olivia sat beside him, eager. "Yes, Mr. Chen. How can I help people who can't see?" Mr. Chen smiled. "The secret lies in awakening the other senses. Let's start with this." He placed a small stone in Olivia's hand. "Close your eyes and tell me what you feel." Olivia obeyed, concentrating on the sensation of the stone in her palm. "It's cold, smooth in some parts, rough in others." "Good," Mr. Chen nodded. "Now, imagine how it would be to guide someone to understand the world in this way. Every texture, every sound, every scent becomes a color on an invisible canvas." The lessons continued for weeks, Mr. Chen teaching Olivia techniques of sensory description, spatial orientation, and even how to create simple tactile maps. "Remember, Olivia," he said in his final lesson, "sight is not always in the eyes. Sometimes it's in the heart and hands of those who care." Back in the present, Olivia opened her eyes, watching Elizabeth with newfound understanding. She knew it was time to begin her plan. Meanwhile, in the Manor's study, Richard ended a phone call, his brow furrowed with worry. The CEO of one of his subsidiary companies had been accused of embezzlement, and the scandal threatened to tarnish the reputation of the entire Harding Group. "Damn it," Richard muttered, running a hand through his silver hair. He glanced out the window, seeing Olivia and Elizabeth in the garden. For a moment, he wished he could join them, escape the complexities of the corporate world, but he knew he couldn't. Not yet. In the kitchen, Mrs. Davis prepared afternoon tea, her eyes occasionally drifting towards the garden. She had noticed something peculiar in recent days. Small objects were being moved around the house, especially around Elizabeth. At first, she attributed it to Elizabeth herself, but then she began to notice Olivia always nearby when these changes occurred. "What is that girl up to?" Mrs. Davis murmured to herself, determined to keep a close watch on the situation. That night, after everyone had retired, Olivia slipped quietly out of her room. With feather-light steps, she moved through the hallway to Elizabeth's room. Carefully, she repositioned a few objects on the dressing table, slightly shifted the position of a chair, and left a small sachet of lavender near the headboard. Back in her own room, Olivia opened her secret notebook, making detailed notes about her actions and observations of the day. The next morning, Elizabeth awoke with a sense of something different. The air carried a faint scent she couldn't immediately place. As she rose, her fingers brushed against the sachet on the nightstand. "That's new," she murmured, intrigued. As she moved around the room, Elizabeth noticed other small differences. The chair wasn't exactly where she remembered, and the objects on her dressing table seemed slightly out of place. During breakfast, Elizabeth mentioned these changes to Richard. "Must have been Mrs. Davis tidying up," Richard suggested, though his tone wasn't entirely convincing. Olivia, sitting quietly at the table, hid a small smile behind her mug of hot chocolate. Over the next few days, Elizabeth continued to notice subtle alterations in her environment. Objects in slightly different places, new faint scents, even the texture of some of her belongings seemed to have changed. "It's odd," Elizabeth commented to Mrs. Davis one afternoon. "It's as if the house is alive." Mrs. Davis, who had been observing Olivia closely, merely murmured in agreement, her suspicions growing. Olivia, meanwhile, continued her secret work. Each night, she made small adjustments to the manor, always focused on stimulating Elizabeth's other senses. A rug with an interesting texture here, a gentle wind chime there, rearranging objects to create more intuitive pathways. In her notebook, Olivia meticulously documented each change and Elizabeth's reaction. "Day 7, she wrote one night. "Mrs. Harding found her way to the garden without assistance today. Progress?" Richard, preoccupied with his company's troubles, barely noticed these subtle changes, but he couldn't help but observe how Elizabeth seemed more animated, more confident in her movements around the house. One evening, as everyone was preparing for bed, Mrs. Davis confronted Olivia in the hallway. "I know you're up to something, young lady," Mrs. Davis said, her voice low but firm. "I don't know exactly what, but I'm watching you." Olivia faced Mrs. Davis, her heart pounding. "I just want to help," she whispered. "Please, trust me." Mrs. Davis studied the girl's face for a long moment, before slowly nodding. "All right, but if you do anything to harm Mrs. Harding—" "I would never do that," Olivia interrupted, her eyes shining with determination. "I promise." As Olivia returned to her room, she knew she was walking a fine line. Her plan was working, but for how long could she keep it a secret? And what would happen when the truth came out? With these thoughts weighing on her mind, Olivia drifted off to sleep, dreaming of a future where her secrets would no longer be necessary, where light would return to Elizabeth's eyes, and where she would finally find the place where she belonged. Richard's study was immersed in a tense twilight, illuminated only by the bluish glow of his laptop. His tired eyes shifted between the financial spreadsheets on the screen and a manila folder on his desk, containing the scant information he had managed to gather about Olivia's past. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured, running a hand through his silver hair. The group home record seemed incomplete, with inexplicable gaps in the girl's history. Richard wondered if he should press further, investigate deeper, but something held him back. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Elizabeth, her face illuminated by a serene smile that Richard hadn't seen in years. "Richard, you won't believe it," she said, her voice overflowing with emotion. I think I saw a shadow today. Just for an instant, but I'm sure of it." Richard stood up abruptly, a mixture of hope and skepticism on his face. "Elizabeth, that's incredible. But how is it possible?" Elizabeth shook her head, equally perplexed. "I can't explain it. For the past few weeks I've been feeling changes, as if my other senses are heightened, and now this." Richard embraced his wife, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, he was ecstatic at the possibility of Elizabeth's improvement. On the other, he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play, something connected to Olivia's mysterious arrival. In the kitchen, Olivia helped Mrs. Davis prepare dinner. The two had developed a comfortable routine, with Olivia learning to cook simple dishes under the housekeeper's patient guidance. "Mrs. Davis," Olivia began hesitantly, "have you ever heard of alternative methods for helping blind people?" Mrs. Davis stopped chopping vegetables, looking at the girl with curiosity. "Tell me what kind of methods, dear?" Olivia bit her lip, pondering how much she could reveal. "Well, things like sensory stimulation, rearranging the environment, spatial orientation techniques." Mrs. Davis narrowed her eyes, recalling the subtle changes she had been noticing around the house. "Olivia, is there something you want to tell me?" For a moment, Olivia considered telling everything. The words were on the tip of her tongue, but fear held her back. "I'm just curious," she finally said, turning her attention back to the pot on the stove. Mrs. Davis nodded slowly, not entirely convinced, but willing to give the girl the benefit of the doubt. "Well, if you're truly interested, we could research the subject together." Olivia's face lit up. "Really? That would be great." That night, during dinner, Elizabeth decided to wear her favorite necklace, a gift from Richard on their 20th wedding anniversary. But when her hands searched for the jewelry in its usual box, they found only empty space. Richard," she called, her voice tense. "Have you seen my sapphire necklace?" The question triggered a frantic search throughout the manor. Richard, Elizabeth, Mrs. Davis, and Olivia scoured every room, every drawer. The tension grew with each passing minute. The necklace remained missing. "Perhaps it was stolen," Richard suggested, his voice grim. "Or simply misplaced," Mrs. Davis added quickly, casting a meaningful glance at Olivia. The girl, feeling the weight of their gazes, retreated to a corner, her heart pounding. She knew she hadn't taken the necklace, but suspicion seemed inevitable. As the search continued, Olivia was pulled back to a memory. Flashback. In the courtyard of the group home, Olivia sat blindfolded, surrounded by various objects. Mr. Chen, seated opposite her, guided the exercise. "Focus, Olivia," he instructed. "Use your other senses to identify each object. Remember, we're not just training your perception, but learning how to guide others through darkness." Olivia reached out, touching each item carefully. "A tennis ball," she said, feeling the fuzzy texture. "A book. The pages are thin. It must be a novel." Her hands continued, identifying keys, a hairbrush, a teacup. "Excellent," Mr. Chen praised. "Now let's try something more challenging. I'm going to rearrange these objects. Your task is not only to identify them, but to describe their relative positions to one another." Olivia nodded, determined. As she practiced, she began to understand how small changes in the environment could make a big difference in a blind person's perception. Back in the present, Olivia was jolted from her memories by the sound of Richard slamming a door. He had received another phone call, and his face was etched with worry. "The board is demanding my presence in New York immediately," he informed Elizabeth. "The situation at the company is escalating." Elizabeth touched Richard's arm gently. "Go, if you must. We'll be fine here." Richard hesitated, torn between his responsibility to his business and his desire to stay with his family. The missing necklace, the inexplicable changes in Elizabeth. the mysteries surrounding Olivia. It all weighed heavily on his mind. "Sir, perhaps," he began, "perhaps it's time I reassessed my priorities." Elizabeth smiled, surprised but pleased by her husband's words. "What do you mean?" Richard looked around at the mansion that had always seemed more a symbol of status than a home, at Olivia huddled in the corner, at Mrs. Davis watching them with maternal concern, and finally at Elizabeth, whose strength and grace continued to amaze him even after all these years. "I mean that maybe there are things more important than balance sheets and board meetings," he replied, making a decision. "I'll call New York and tell them I can't make it. My place is here, with you." The tension in the room seemed to dissipate somewhat with those words. Olivia, observing the scene, felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Richard's continued presence meant more watchful eyes on her activities, but it also offered more opportunities for her plan. As the night wore on and the search for the necklace continued fruitlessly, each inhabitant of Harding Manor was immersed in their own thoughts and secrets. Richard, determined to unravel the mysteries surrounding them, Elizabeth, marveling at her newfound perceptions, Mrs. Davis, vigilant and protective, and Olivia, balancing precariously between hope and fear, knowing that each day brought her closer to both success and the revelation of her hidden truth. The full moon bathed Harding Manor in a silvery light, casting dancing shadows across the silent hallways. Olivia, with steps as light as feathers, glided down the corridor towards Elizabeth's room. In her hands, she carried a small music box and a vial of lavender essential oil. Carefully, Olivia placed the music box on Elizabeth's nightstand, setting it to play softly at dawn. She sprinkled a few drops of the aromatic oil on the pillow, creating a subtle yet impactful sensory experience. Before leaving, she rearranged a few objects in the room, creating a pattern she knew Elizabeth would subconsciously notice. The next morning, during breakfast, Elizabeth surprised everyone. "Richard," she announced, her voice filled with excitement, "you won't believe what happened this morning." Richard looked up from his newspaper, curious. "What is it, my dear?" I managed to find my way from the bedroom to here without touching anything. It's as if I could sense where things were." Mrs. Davis and Richard exchanged astonished glances. Olivia, meanwhile, hid a smile behind her mug of hot chocolate. "That's incredible, Elizabeth," Richard murmured, a mixture of joy and confusion in his voice. "Oh, but how is it possible?" Elizabeth shook her head, equally perplexed. "I don't know how to explain it. It's as if my other senses are heightened, and there was this soft music this morning. It was so comforting." Richard frowned, his analytical mind searching for a logical explanation. His eyes briefly settled on Olivia, who seemed absorbed in her breakfast. Later that day, Richard closeted himself in his study, spreading documents across his desk. Group home records, school reports, even old newspaper clippings, anything that could shed light on Olivia's past. The more he investigated, the more inconsistencies he found. Dates that didn't match, names that changed, inexplicable gaps in the girl's history. Richard felt he was on the verge of an important discovery, but something still eluded him. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Mrs. Davis watched Olivia with attentive eyes. The girl was preparing a special tea, blending herbs with a precision that seemed beyond her years. "Olivia, Mrs. Davis called out, her voice firm but gentle. "I think we need to talk." Olivia froze, her heart quickening. "About what, Mrs. Davis?" "About what you've been doing at night, about the changes in the house, about Mrs. Harding." For a moment, Olivia considered denying everything, but something in Mrs. Davis's gaze, a mixture of concern and understanding, made her hesitate. Olivia began, her voice trembling slightly. "I just want to help. I promise I'm not doing anything wrong." Mrs. Davis approached, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "I'm listening, dear, tell me." And so Olivia began to reveal parts of her plan. She spoke about the techniques she had learned at the group home, about how small changes in the environment could make a big difference for someone who was blind. She explained how she was trying to stimulate Elizabeth's other senses, helping her to see in a new way. "Please, Mrs. Davis," Olivia pleaded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Don't tell Mr. Harding. I know I should have spoken sooner, but I was afraid that you wouldn't believe me, afraid of being sent away." Mrs. Davis listened in silence, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally, she let out a long sigh. "Oh, child," she murmured, pulling Olivia into a hug. "Your heart is in the right place, but secrets have a way of complicating things. I'll keep your secret for now, but promise me that soon we'll tell Mr. and Mrs. Harding everything." Olivia nodded, relieved and apprehensive at the same time. That night, Richard stayed up late, lost in thought. His gaze wandered to an old photograph on his desk, himself much younger, standing beside his father at the opening of his first company. The memory transported him back to that day so many years ago. Flashback. Young Richard, just 25, stood before a small office building. A banner proclaimed Harding Technologies grand opening. His father, a stern man with steel grey hair, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember, Richard," he said, his voice grave, "in the business world, there's no room for sentiment. Be firm, be ruthless, that's how you build an empire." Richard nodded, absorbing the words. Part of him wanted to argue, to speak of ethics, of social responsibility, but the desire to prove himself, to make his father proud, silenced those voices. "I understand, Father," he replied. "I won't let you down." Back in the present, Richard blinked, pushing the memory away. That moment had defined the course of his life, shaping him into the relentless businessman he had become. But now, with Elizabeth demonstrating inexplicable improvements, with Olivia's enigmatic presence, and with his own doubts growing in his heart, Richard wondered if it wasn't time to rewrite that lesson. Looking out the window at the moon illuminating the manor's gardens, Richard made a decision. He would uncover the truth about Olivia and about the changes in Elizabeth, no matter the cost. But this time, he wouldn't be guided solely by the cold logic of business, but also by the warmth of compassion he had long suppressed. With this resolve, Richard finally prepared for bed, unaware that the secrets he sought to uncover were closer and more complex than he could ever imagine. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Elizabeth's room, illuminating her serene face as she stretched awake. Her eyes, though still unable to see clearly, seemed more alive, more luminous. Elizabeth sat up in bed, reaching instinctively for the nightstand. Her fingers found the glass of water exactly where she expected, without hesitation. "Richard," she called, a smile playing on her lips. Richard, who was dressing for the day, turned in surprise. "Yes, my dear. I can feel things better. It's as if the room has gained a new dimension." Richard approached, sitting on the edge of the bed. He watched in wonder as Elizabeth moved about the room with a grace and confidence she hadn't displayed in years. "That's incredible, Elizabeth," he murmured, a mixture of joy and perplexity in his voice. "But it's also inexplicable." Determined to understand what was happening, Richard scheduled an appointment with Dr. Lewis, a renowned ophthalmologist in New York. The doctor examined Elizabeth thoroughly, conducting a series of tests. "Mr. Harding," Dr. Lewis began, adjusting his glasses, "I must admit I'm intrigued. While there are no significant changes in the physical structure of Mrs. Harding's eyes, her responses to stimuli and her spatial awareness have dramatically improved." "What does that mean, Doctor?" Richard asked anxiously. "Well, it's as if her brain is reorganizing, adapting. It's a rare phenomenon, but not unheard of. Some call it blindsight or extrasensory perception, but frankly, there's still much we don't understand about it." Richard nodded, his mind buzzing with questions. He couldn't help but think of Olivia and the changes that had begun with her arrival. Meanwhile, back at the manor, Olivia took advantage of Richard's absence to intensify her sessions with Elizabeth. She had prepared a series of sensory exercises, scattering objects with different textures around Elizabeth's room. "Mrs. Harding," Olivia called softly, "shall we try something new today?" Elizabeth, intrigued, agreed. Olivia gently guided her, encouraging her to explore the objects, to describe her sensations, to create mental maps of the space around her. They were so engrossed in the activity that they didn't hear the door open. Mrs. Davis, carrying a tray of tea, froze in the doorway, observing the scene before her. For a moment, she considered intervening, revealing everything to Richard. But the joy on Elizabeth's face, the care and dedication in Olivia's, Mrs. Davis hesitated. Softly, she closed the door, deciding to keep the secret a little longer, but the weight of that decision pressed heavily on her heart. That afternoon, Richard was in his study, an important video conference underway. The company's board was pushing for cost cuts, including the closure of a factory that employed hundreds of workers. "Gentlemen," Richard began, his voice firm, "I understand the pressure for immediate results, but I propose a different approach." He presented a restructuring plan that, while less profitable in the short term, would preserve jobs and invest in innovation. The old Richard would have yielded to the board's pressure, focused solely on the numbers, but something had changed. "Think of the families, the workers," he argued. "Our responsibility goes beyond the shareholders. It's to the community, to the people who have entrusted their livelihoods to us." There was resistance, of course, but by the end of the meeting, Richard's plan was approved, albeit by a narrow margin. Disconnecting the call, Richard leaned back in his chair, reflecting. Olivia's presence, the changes in Elizabeth, the dinner table conversations about compassion and second chances, it had all touched something deep within him, something that had long lain dormant. Meanwhile, in the Manor's attic, Olivia explored old boxes, searching for more items that could stimulate Elizabeth's senses. It was then that her eyes landed on a dusty photograph. The photo showed a group of children in front of a building that Olivia immediately recognized, the group home where she had grown up. But what caught her attention was a young woman in the corner of the image. She looked remarkably like Elizabeth. With trembling hands, Olivia turned the photo over. On the back, an inscription, "Visit to St. Jude's Group Home, 1998. Elizabeth Harding and the children." Olivia's heart raced. Elizabeth had visited her group home years before. Could there be a deeper connection she was unaware of? Lost in thought, Olivia didn't notice Richard entering the attic. "Olivia!" His voice startled her. "What are you doing up here?" Olivia turned quickly, hiding the photo behind her back. I was just exploring Mr. Harding. I hope you don't mind." Richard observed her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Of course not, but it seems you found something interesting." Olivia hesitated. Revealing the photo could raise more questions, expose her secret. But hiding it would only increase Richard's suspicions. With a trembling sigh, she held out the photograph. "I found this, Mr. Harding. Is that Mrs. Harding at my old group home?" Richard took the photo, his eyes widening in recognition. "Yes, it is. It was a charity project Elizabeth spearheaded years ago before the accident." He looked at Olivia, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. You were there at that time?" Olivia nodded slowly. "I was very young, but yes, I was there." A heavy silence fell between them. Richard looked from the photo to Olivia, his mind working furiously to connect the dots. "Olivia," he said finally, his voice soft but firm, "I think it's time we had a serious conversation. About you, about Elizabeth, about everything that's been happening in this house." Olivia felt a shiver run down her spine. The moment she had both dreaded and, in a way, anticipated had finally arrived. With a lump in her throat, she nodded. "Yes, Mr. Harding. I think it's time." As they descended the attic stairs, Olivia knew she was about to risk everything, her new life, the trust she had built, perhaps even her freedom. But she also knew she could no longer live with secrets. It was time for the truth, no matter the consequences. Richard, in turn, felt he was on the verge of a revelation that could change everything. The photo in his hand, Elizabeth's mysterious improvements, Olivia's enigmatic past, it all seemed to be converging on this moment. The fate of the Harding family was about to be rewritten, and none of them could predict what the future held. Richard's study was filled with a palpable tension. Olivia, seated in a leather armchair, seemed tiny against the imposing mahogany desk. Richard, his fingers steepled, observed her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Olivia," he began, his voice calm but firm, I think it's time we talked about what's really going on here. The girl swallowed hard, her hands nervously clutching the hem of her shirt. What do you want to know, Mr. Harding? Richard leaned forward. Elizabeth's improvements, your nighttime activities, your past at the group home. It all seems to be connected somehow. I need you to tell me the truth, Olivia. Olivia took a deep breath, knowing she could no longer hide everything. I've been helping Mrs. Harding, she admitted finally. At the group home, I learned techniques to help blind people navigate better. Richard's eyes widened slightly. What kind of techniques? Sensory stimulation, rearranging the environment, spatial awareness exercises, Olivia explained, gaining confidence as she spoke. They're unconventional methods, but effective. Richard nodded slowly, processing the information. And why didn't you tell us this before? Olivia lowered her gaze. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, that you'd send me away. I just wanted to help Mr. Harding, Mrs. Harding. She reminds me of someone who was very important to me. At this, Olivia allowed herself to drift back to a pivotal moment in her childhood. Flashback. Olivia, just 6 years old, sat on the lap of an elderly woman in the group home garden. The woman, with snow-white hair and milky eyes, smiled gently. Grandma Rose, Olivia asked, why are your eyes different? The woman chuckled softly. My eyes can't see like yours, dear, but that doesn't mean I can't see the world. How? Olivia questioned, confused. Well, Grandma Rose explained, taking Olivia's hand and guiding it across her wrinkled face. I see with my hands, with my ears, with my heart. And you, my little Olivia, can help me see even better. In the months that followed, Olivia became Grandma Rose's eyes, describing colors, shapes, expressions. She learned to guide, to describe, to create images with words and touch. One day, Grandma Rose said on her deathbed, you will use this gift to help others, Olivia. Promise me. With tears in her eyes, Olivia promised. Back in the present, Olivia blinked, pushing the memory away. I promised someone very special that I would use what I learned to help others, she told Richard, her voice thick with emotion. Richard, touched by the emotion in the girl's voice, softened his expression. I understand your fear, Olivia. But hiding the truth is rarely the best solution. Still, what you've done for Elizabeth is remarkable. At that moment, they were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Davis, her face a mask of concern. Mr. Harding, she said hesitantly, there's something I need to tell you about Olivia and Mrs. Harding. Richard gestured for her to enter. Mrs. Davis, casting an apologetic glance at Olivia, began to recount her observations of the past few days, the changes in the house, Olivia's nighttime activities, Elizabeth's surprising improvements. As Mrs. Davis spoke, Richard's expression shifted between surprise, understanding, and a hint of self-reproach for not having noticed himself. Garçon, why didn't you tell me this sooner, Mrs. Davis? Richard asked, his voice more weary than accusatory. Mrs. Davis wrung her hands nervously. I wanted to be certain first, sir, and to be honest, seeing Mrs. Harding so happy and confident again, I didn't want to risk interrupting that. Richard nodded, understanding. He turned to Olivia, who seemed about to shrink into the armchair. Olivia, he said gently, I appreciate your honesty, even if it's belated, but I need to know, is there anything else you're not telling me? Olivia hesitated. There was more, much more. The real reason for her coming, the connection to Elizabeth's past, the specific method she was using, but revealing everything now seemed too risky. No, Mr. Harding, she lied, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. That's all. Before Richard could press further, they were interrupted by a cry of surprise from downstairs. The three of them rushed out of the study, hurrying down the stairs. In the main hall, they found Elizabeth standing, her eyes wide, tears streaming down her face. Richard, she cried, her voice trembling with emotion. I can see shadows, silhouettes. It's incredible. Richard rushed to embrace his wife, his own vision blurring with tears of joy. Mrs. Davis sobbed quietly, a radiant smile on her face. Olivia watched the scene with a mixture of happiness and apprehension. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at Harding Manor changed dramatically. There was a lightness, a joy that hadn't been seen in years. Elizabeth, emboldened by her newfound perceptions, spent hours in the garden rediscovering colors and shapes. Richard, though still filled with questions, seemed more relaxed, more present. He spent more time with Elizabeth and Olivia, listening to stories, laughing, relearning how to be part of a family. Olivia, in turn, felt increasingly like a true Harding. There were moments when she almost forgot she wasn't actually their daughter, and that realization filled her with both joy and guilt. One evening, while helping Elizabeth prepare for bed, Olivia was surprised by a tight hug. "Thank you, my dear," Elizabeth whispered. "I don't know exactly what you did, but I know I owe you so much." Olivia felt tears welling up in her eyes. I just wanted to help," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. Elizabeth smiled, stroking the girl's face. "You did more than help, Olivia. You brought light back into our home, into our family." In that moment, Olivia felt the weight of her secrets more than ever. She knew there were still truths to be revealed, risks to be faced. But looking at Elizabeth's serene face, at the photo of Richard genuinely smiling for the first time in years on the nightstand, Olivia made a silent promise. She would find a way to tell the whole truth, to fully unite her past with the Hardings' present. Because now, more than ever, she understood what Grandma Rose meant about seeing with the heart. And Olivia's heart saw clearly. This was her family, and she would do anything to protect and keep them together. The shrill ringing of the telephone sliced through the tranquil morning air at Harding Manor. Richard Itio, who was enjoying a rare family breakfast, answered with a frown. "Harding speaking," he said, his voice instantly taking on a professional tone. As the conversation progressed, Richard's face grew increasingly tense. Elizabeth and Olivia exchanged worried glances, while Mrs. Davis observed discreetly from the kitchen. "I understand," Richard finally replied, his voice grim. "I'll be there in an hour." Hanging up the phone, he turned to his family, his expression serious. "Sorry, there's been a serious problem at the company. One of our major investors is threatening to withdraw all their capital due to allegations of unethical practices in one of our subsidiaries." Elizabeth reached out, touching Richard's arm gently. "How bad is it, dear?" Richard sighed heavily. "If we can't resolve this quickly, we could lose millions. Jobs will be at risk. The company's reputation, our reputation, everything is on the line." Olivia, sensing the weight of the situation, spoke softly. "It'll be all right, Mr. Harding. You'll figure it out." Richard looked at the girl, a sad smile on his lips. "Thank you, Olivia, I hope so." As Richard prepared to leave, Elizabeth decided to take a walk in the garden. Accompanied by Olivia, she strolled slowly, enjoying the warmth of the sun on her face. Suddenly, Elizabeth stopped, her eyes widening. "Olivia," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. I can see colors. They're blurry, but, oh my God, they're colors." Olivia, caught off guard by the rapidity of Elizabeth's progress, felt a mixture of joy and panic. Her method was working much faster than she had anticipated. "That's wonderful, Mrs. Harding," she exclaimed, trying to hide her apprehension. "Perhaps we should tell Mr. Harding when he returns." Elizabeth nodded, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, of course." "Oh, Olivia, it's like a miracle." Meanwhile, back at the manor, Richard frantically searched for some documents before leaving. In his haste, he knocked over a stack of papers. As he gathered them, his eyes landed on a document he didn't recognize. It was a letter, partially hidden among financial reports. Richard picked it up, his eyes quickly scanning the contents. It was an old correspondence from the group home, mentioning a child named Olivia, and a name that made his heart skip a beat. Harding. Before he could investigate further, the sound of his driver's horn brought him back to reality. Tucking the letter into his pocket, Richard hurried out, his mind now divided between the crisis at the company and the mystery he had just stumbled upon. Hours passed. Olivia, anxious about Elizabeth's unexpected progress, decided she needed to accelerate her plan. She slipped into her room, retrieving a small electronic device from its hiding place, the core of her method for helping Elizabeth. But as she turned to leave, she found Mrs. Davis standing in the doorway, her eyes wide and fixed on the device in Olivia's hands. "Olivia," Mrs. Davis said, her voice a mixture of shock and understanding. "What is that?" Olivia, realizing there was no way to hide it, decided it was time for the truth, or at least part of it. "Mrs. Davis, please listen to me," she pleaded. "This device, it's part of the method I'm using to help Mrs. Harding. It's an experimental technology that stimulates the visual cortex. I brought it from the group home." Mrs. Davis entered the room, closing the door behind her. "So that's how you've been helping Elizabeth with secret technology?" Olivia nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I just wanted to help. Please, don't tell Mr. Harding yet if he finds out." At that moment, they were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Richard had returned. Mrs. Davis looked from Olivia to the device, then back at the girl. Making a decision, she extended her hand. "Give it to me, Olivia. I'll keep it for now. But we have to tell Thomas and Elizabeth the truth. Today." Olivia, reluctantly but with no other choice, handed the device to Mrs. Davis. Together, they went downstairs to meet Richard. In the living room, they found Richard sitting, his face a mask of worry. Elizabeth sat beside him, comforting him. "Richard," Mrs. Davis began softly, "there's something we need to discuss, all of us." In the minutes that followed, the truth, or at least part of it, came out. Mrs. Davis revealed her observations and suspicions. Olivia, trembling, explained about the device and her unconventional method. Richard listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. "Olivia, do you have any idea of the risks you took? Of what could have happened if something went wrong?" Elizabeth, on the other hand, seemed more amazed than angry. But it's working, Richard. I can see colors today. It's a miracle." Richard sighed deeply, pulling out the letter he had found earlier. "There's more. Elizabeth, I found this today. It seems Olivia may have a connection to our family that we weren't aware of." Olivia felt her heart race. This was the moment she had both feared and hoped for. With a courage she didn't know she possessed, she stood up. "Mr. and Mrs. Harding," she began, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have said from the beginning." And so, Olivia began to reveal the whole truth, about who she really was, about why she had come, about the deep connection she shared with the Hardings. As the story unfolded, Richard and Elizabeth's faces went through a myriad of emotions. Shock, confusion, understanding, and finally, a complex mixture of pain and love. When Olivia finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. It was Elizabeth who broke it, reaching out her arms to the girl. "Oh, Olivia," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Olivia rushed into Elizabeth's arms, sobbing. "I was afraid of losing you, afraid of ruining everything." Richard, still processing everything he had heard, joined the embrace. "We have a lot to talk about, a lot to sort out," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But one thing is certain. You're part of this family now, Olivia, no matter what." Mrs. Davis watched the scene, tears in her own eyes. She knew the days ahead would be difficult, that there would be many painful conversations and complicated decisions to be made. But in that moment, seeing the Harding family united, she felt a spark of hope. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Life at Harding Manor would never be the same, and perhaps, just perhaps, it would be better than any of them could have imagined. The silence that hung over the living room at Harding Manor was almost palpable. Olivia, seated between Richard and Elizabeth on the sofa, felt the weight of years of secrets about to be revealed. Mrs. Davis stood near the fireplace, her presence a silent source of support. Olivia took a deep breath, summoning all her courage. "Mr. and Mrs. Harding," she began, her voice trembling. "There's much more to me and why I came here than I've told you. It's time you knew the whole truth." Richard nodded encouragingly, while Elizabeth gently squeezed the girl's hand. "My full name is Olivia Harding," she revealed, watching Richard's eyes widen in recognition. I'm your niece," Elizabeth gasped, her free hand covering her mouth in shock. Richard, in turn, looked as if he had been struck by lightning. "But how?" he murmured, his mind racing to connect the dots. Olivia continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. My father was your younger brother, David. He died when I was very young, along with my mother, in a car accident. I ended up in the group home because no one knew I existed. David had distanced himself from the family years before." Richard closed his eyes, painful memories flooding his mind. David, the rebellious younger brother, who had cut ties with the family after a heated argument. Richard had always blamed himself for not having done more to reconcile. "But how did you find out about us?" Elizabeth asked softly. Olivia smiled sadly. "It was Mr. Chen, a wise old man at the group home. He knew my father and knew the family history. When he discovered I was a Harding, he began to train me." "Train you?" Richard questioned, intrigued. Olivia nodded, picking up the small device Mrs. Davis was still holding. Mr. Chen was more than he seemed. He was a brilliant scientist who had developed revolutionary technology to stimulate the visual cortex in blind people. But due to ethical conflicts with large corporations, he went into hiding at the group home. She then began to explain in detail the method she had been using to help Elizabeth. The device, Olivia explained, emitted specific electromagnetic pulses that, when combined with sensory exercises and environmental reorganization, could stimulate the brain to be see in new ways. Every night, while Mrs. Harding slept, I activated the device for short periods, Olivia confessed. During the day, I made small changes around the house, introduced new sensory stimuli, all to complement the treatment. Elizabeth was stunned. "So that's why I started to feel things differently, to see colors and shapes." Olivia nodded. "Yes. The device was reactivating areas of your brain that had become dormant after the accident. The exercises we did together were training your brain to interpret these new signals." Richard, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke. "Olivia, what you did is incredible, but also incredibly risky. Do you have any idea of the legal and ethical implications of this?" Olivia lowered her eyes. "I know, Mr. Harding, but I had to try. Mr. Chen made me promise on his deathbed that I would use this knowledge to help someone in need. When I found out about Mrs. Harding, I knew it was my chance to fulfill that promise and, at the same time, get to know my family." Elizabeth, with tears in her eyes, pulled Olivia into a tight hug. "Oh, my dear, you risked so much for us. I don't know whether to be angry or eternally grateful." Richard seemed emotionally torn. On one hand, he was amazed by Elizabeth's improvement and touched by Olivia's dedication. On the other, his analytical mind couldn't ignore the risks and potential legal consequences. "Olivia," he said, his voice softer now, "I understand why you did this. But using experimental technology without medical supervision, if something had gone wrong..." Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know, Uncle Richard. I'm sorry for lying and hiding all of this. I just wanted to be a part of this family to help Aunt Elizabeth. I didn't want to cause any trouble." Mrs. Davis, who had been watching silently, finally spoke. "Mr. Harding, if I may, what's done is done, and the result, however risky the process, is undeniably positive. Perhaps we should focus on what to do from now on." Richard nodded slowly, acknowledging the wisdom in Mrs. Davis's words. "You're right, Mrs. Davis. We need to think about the next steps." He turned to Olivia. "First, we need to legally verify your situation. If you truly are David's daughter, that changes a lot of things." Elizabeth, still holding Olivia close, added, "And what about the treatment? Can we continue it in a more official way?" Olivia bit her lip, hesitant. "There's one more thing you need to know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Tell us about the accident that blinded Aunt Elizabeth." Richard and Elizabeth exchanged worried glances. "What about the accident?" Richard asked. Olivia took a deep breath before continuing. "Mr. Chen, he told me it wasn't an ordinary accident. He believed it was related to the technology he had developed. That someone wanted to prevent this technology from reaching the public." A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard felt a chill run down his spine, memories of the day of Elizabeth's accident flooding his mind. There had always been something strange about that day, details that never quite fit. "Olivia," Richard said slowly, "are you sure about this?" The girl nodded solemnly. "Mr. Chen left a diary. He detailed his suspicions there. I brought it with me." Elizabeth, her voice trembling, asked, "So, my blindness wasn't an accident. Someone did this on purpose." Olivia hugged Elizabeth tighter. "I'm so sorry, Aunt Elizabeth. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was afraid that it might put everyone in danger." Richard stood up abruptly, walking to the window. His mind was reeling. The truth about Olivia, the experimental treatment, and now this revelation about Elizabeth's accident. It was too much to process at once. "We need help," he finally said, turning to face his family. "Legal help, medical help, and maybe even security. If what Olivia is saying is true, this goes far beyond us." Elizabeth, still holding Olivia close, nodded. "Richard is right. But no matter what happens, Olivia, you're part of this family now. We'll face this together." Mrs. Davis, sensing that the family needed a moment alone, discreetly withdrew from the room, not without first casting a supportive glance at Olivia. Richard joined Elizabeth and Olivia on the sofa, wrapping them both in a protective embrace. "We have a long road ahead," he said softly. "Many questions to answer, many challenges to face. But Elizabeth is right. We're a family now, and families stick together." Olivia, nestled between her uncle and aunt, felt for the first time in years that she was truly home. The future was uncertain, perhaps even dangerous, but she was no longer alone. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows across the room, the Harding family remained united, facing together the revelations of the day and the uncertainties of tomorrow. A new journey was just beginning, a journey that promised not only Elizabeth's healing, but also the uncovering of long-buried truths and the forging of family bonds stronger than ever. The morning sun bathed Harding Manor in a golden light, reflecting the mood of joy and anticipation that hung in the air. It was the day Olivia's adoption would be finalized, legally formalizing what was already a fact in their hearts. She was part of the family. Richard, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, nervously adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. Elizabeth, radiant in an emerald green dress that accentuated her now brighter eyes, smiled as Mrs. Davis helped arrange her hair. "I can't believe this day has finally arrived," Elizabeth said, her voice overflowing with emotion. Richard approached, kissing his wife's forehead softly. "I know. It feels like Olivia has always been a part of our lives." Upstairs, Olivia looked at herself in the mirror, barely recognizing the girl she saw reflected back. Dressed in a delicate white dress with blue accents, her hair carefully arranged in soft curls, she looked the embodiment of innocence and hope. "Are you ready, dear?" Mrs. Davis asked, appearing at the bedroom door. Olivia nodded, a mixture of nervousness and excitement in her eyes. "Yes, I'm ready to officially be a Harding." The small celebration was held in the manor's garden. A family friend who was a judge was present to officiate the adoption, along with a few close friends and colleagues of Richard's. The atmosphere was one of pure joy. Richard raised his glass for a toast. "To our daughter, Olivia Harding," he proclaimed, his voice thick with emotion, "who brought light back into our lives." The guests raised their glasses in response, and Olivia felt her heart swell with happiness. Finally, she had a family, a home. It was in this moment of pure joy that the unexpected happened. A voice, familiar yet strange, cut through the air. "Olivia!" Everyone turned towards the garden entrance. There, standing with an expression of shock and hope, was a middle-aged woman, her eyes fixed on Olivia. Olivia felt the world spin around her. That face, she knew it from the old photograph she secretly kept. "Mom," she whispered, barely believing her own eyes. The silence that fell over the garden was deafening. Richard was the first to recover from the shock. "Anne?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and caution. Anne stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes, Richard, it's me. I know everyone thought I was dead, but—" "How?" Elizabeth interrupted, her voice trembling. How is this possible? Anne took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Olivia. It's a long story. After the accident, I lost my memory. I spent years living in a small town, not knowing who I was. Only recently have the memories started to return. Olivia, still in shock, took a hesitant step towards Anne. You're alive? All this time? Anne nodded, reaching out a trembling hand to touch Olivia's face. My girl and my Olivia, I'm so sorry for not being there for you. The moment was interrupted by Richard, who placed himself protectively beside Olivia. Anne, I understand this is a shock for all of us, but what exactly do you want? Anne straightened her shoulders, her expression becoming more determined. I came to get my daughter, Richard. I know you've taken care of her, and I'm eternally grateful for that. But Olivia is my daughter, and I want the chance to be her mother. The initial shock gave way to a palpable tension. Elizabeth moved to stand beside Olivia, putting a protective arm around the girl. Anne, Elizabeth began, her voice surprisingly firm. Olivia is part of our family now. We love her as our own daughter. Olivia, caught in the whirlwind of emotions, looked from Anne to Richard and Elizabeth, her heart torn. On one hand, this was the mother she had always dreamed of meeting. On the other, the Hardings had become her family in every way that mattered. I don't know what to say, Olivia finally spoke, her voice trembling. I always dreamed of meeting you, Mum, but Richard and Elizabeth, they're my family now. Anne stepped forward, her eyes pleading. Olivia, I understand, but please, give me a chance. We can get to know each other, rebuild what we've lost. Richard, sensing the gravity of the situation, intervened. Anne, this is a lot to process at once. Perhaps we should all calm down and discuss this civilly. Inside the house. Reluctantly, everyone agreed. The guests were gently dismissed, leaving only the Harding family, Anne, and the judge, who had been asked to stay due to the legal implications of the situation. In Richard's study, the tension was palpable. The judge, after briefly hearing the situation, spoke gravely. This is a legally complex situation. Ms. Anne, as Olivia's biological mother, has parental rights that cannot be ignored. On the other hand, the adoption process by the Hardings was underway. A full investigation and possibly a court hearing will be necessary to determine custody. Olivia, seated between Elizabeth and Anne, felt as if she were being torn apart. I don't want to choose, she said, tears streaming down her face. I love you, Richard and Elizabeth, but she's my mother. Elizabeth hugged Olivia, her own tears falling. Oh, honey. We understand no one is asking you to choose. Richard, trying to maintain his composure, asked the judge, what are our options? The judge sighed. At the moment, the legal situation is uncertain. Until everything is resolved in court, I suggest Olivia remain with the Hardings, as it has been her residence. But Anne should have visitation rights. Anne, although clearly not satisfied with the solution, nodded. I agree. I just want the chance to get to know my daughter. Richard and Elizabeth exchanged glances. The thought of potentially losing Olivia was devastating, but they knew they had to think about what was best for the girl. Let's do this the right way, Richard finally said, for Olivia's sake. As the meeting concluded, with promises of further discussions and legal arrangements in the coming days, Olivia found herself at the center of an emotional storm. The day that should have been one of pure joy had turned into a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Looking at Richard and Elizabeth, who had opened their hearts and home to her, and then at Anne, the mother she thought she had lost forever, Olivia knew her life had irrevocably changed. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The true meaning of family would be tested in the days to come. The days following Anne's surprise appearance were a whirlwind of emotions for everyone at Harding Manor. Olivia, in particular, felt torn between two worlds. The comfort and love she had found with Richard and Elizabeth, and the newly rediscovered biological connection with Anne. One sunny morning, Olivia sat in the garden contemplating an old photograph of her biological parents. Anne approached quietly, sitting beside her. You look so much like your father, Anne commented softly, touching the photograph. Olivia looked at her biological mother, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in her eyes. "Why did you disappear? Why did you let us believe you were dead?" Anne sighed deeply, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh, Olivia, I never wanted to abandon you. After the accident, I lost my memory. I wandered, confused, for months. When I finally received medical help, I didn't know who I was, where I came from." She paused, composing herself. "I spent years living in a small coastal town, working as a teacher. Gradually, fragments of memory began to return. It was a slow and painful process. When I finally remembered you, David, so many years had passed. I feared it was too late." Olivia absorbed every word, her heart heavy with the pain her mother must have felt. And how did you find me?" "When I recovered my memories, I began searching for you tirelessly. I found out about the group home, about your pending adoption by the Hardings. I know I arrived at a complicated time, but I couldn't bear the thought of losing you again." Meanwhile, inside the manor, Richard and Elizabeth met with their lawyer, discussing legal options. "The situation is delicate," the lawyer explained. "Anne, as the biological mother, has significant legal rights. However, Olivia's well-being is the court's top priority." Elizabeth, visibly distraught, rubbed her eyes. In recent days, she had noticed that her vision, which had been steadily improving, seemed to be regressing due to stress. "We can't simply ignore the years Olivia spent without Anne," Elizabeth argued. "We are her family now." Richard, noticing Elizabeth's discomfort, held her hand gently. "We're all emotionally involved here, but we need to think about what's best for Olivia." After hours of discussion, Richard had a bold idea. He stood up abruptly, a light of determination in his eyes. What if we propose shared custody?" he suggested. "Anne could move nearby, Olivia could spend time with both families. We could be an extended family." The lawyer pondered for a moment. "It's an unconventional proposal, but it could work if all parties agree." Elizabeth, initially hesitant, felt a wave of understanding wash over her. "Family. It's not just about blood, is it? It's about love, about choice." Meanwhile, in the garden, Olivia finally found the courage to express her feelings to Anne. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I dreamed of meeting you for so long, but now it's all so complicated. Richard and Elizabeth, they saved me in so many ways. They're my family too." Anne listened attentively, silent tears streaming down her face. "I understand, dear. I don't want to take that away from you. I just want the chance to be a part of your life, somehow." Olivia hugged Anne impulsively. "I want you in my life too. I just don't know how to make it work." At that moment, Mrs. Davis appeared in the garden, carrying a tray with tea. She observed the scene for a moment before speaking. "You know," she began, her voice soft but firm, "in all my years working for families, I've learned that love isn't a finite resource. The more you give, the more it grows." Olivia and Anne looked at Mrs. Davis, intrigued. Mrs. Davis continued, "Perhaps the question isn't about choosing between families, but rather expanding the concept of family. Why can't you all be a part of Olivia's life?" Her words hung in the air, planting a seed of possibility. That evening, everyone gathered in the living room. The air was thick with tension, but also with hope. Richard presented his idea of shared custody, of creating an extended family. Anne Bass, initially surprised, considered the proposal. I don't want to take Olivia away from a loving home. I just want the chance to be a part of her life." Elizabeth, who had spent the day reflecting, spoke with emotion. "Anne, we love Olivia as our own daughter. But I understand your pain, your loss. Maybe we can all be a family in a new and different way." Olivia, hearing Elizabeth's words, felt her heart expand. "I love you all," she said, looking from Richard and Elizabeth to Anne. "I don't want to lose anyone." Richard, encouraged by everyone's receptiveness, elaborated. "We could adapt the guest house for Anne. Olivia could spend time with all of us. We could create new traditions, new bonds." Anne, touched by the Hardings' generosity, nodded slowly. I would like that very much, if everyone agrees." Mrs. Davis, who was watching silently, couldn't help but smile. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be adjustments and challenges. But she also saw the deep love everyone shared for Olivia, and the genuine desire to make things work. As the night wore on, the details began to be discussed: legal arrangements, schedules, adaptations to the house. But more importantly, a new definition of family was being forged. Olivia, seated between Elizabeth and Anne, with Richard nearby, felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she glimpsed a path where she wouldn't have to choose, where she could have all the love she had always longed for. When everyone finally retired for the night, a sense of hope lingered in Harding Manor. Conflicted hearts had found common ground, united by their love for a little girl who had touched all their lives in profound and unexpected ways. The sun rose over the city, casting a golden glow on the imposing facade of the courthouse. The Harding family, accompanied by Anne, entered the building, their faces a mixture of anxiety and hope. Today was the day of the mediation that would determine Olivia's future. In the mediation room, Richard, Elizabeth, Anne, and Olivia sat before the mediator, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a calm voice. "We are here to find the best solution for Olivia," the mediator began. "So let's hear from all parties and work together to reach an agreement." Richard was the first to speak. He stood up, adjusting his suit, and presented a surprising proposal. "We propose not just shared custody," he said, his voice firm, "but the creation of a new family structure. Anne would live on the Harding estate, in a house adapted especially for her. Olivia would have two homes, two families, united in their love for her." The mediator raised his eyebrows, clearly intrigued. "That's unconventional, Mr. Harding. But please, continue." Richard went on, detailing how he would use his resources to ensure all of Olivia's needs were met, including education, healthcare, and emotional well-being. Anne, who had been silent until then, spoke with a choked voice. "When I came looking for Olivia, I thought I would have to fight. I never imagined such generosity." She looked at Richard and Elizabeth with tear-filled eyes. "You truly love her, don't you?" Elizabeth reached out, gently touching Anne's arm. "As much as you do, Anne. Olivia has taught us that love can expand in ways we never imagined." It was then that Olivia, who had been quiet until now, asked to speak. The mediator nodded, encouraging her. "I have an idea," she said, her voice small but determined. What if we created a family journal, where we could all write, share moments, even when we weren't physically together? That way, we would always be connected, always a family." A smile spread across the mediator's face. "That's a wonderful idea, Olivia. It shows maturity and a desire to keep everyone united." As the mediation progressed, something extraordinary happened. Elizabeth, who had been blinking and rubbing her eyes throughout the morning, suddenly gasped. "Richard," she whispered, clutching her husband's arm. I can see. Not perfectly, but..." She looked at Olivia and Anne, seeing them clearly for the first time. "Oh my God." The room fell silent, everyone absorbing the miracle that had just occurred. Olivia rushed to hug Elizabeth, tears of joy streaming down her face. The mediator, visibly moved, cleared his throat. "Well, it seems we have more reason to celebrate. Given everything I've heard and seen today, I am confident in recommending Olivia's official adoption by the Hardings, with regular and extensive visitation rights for Anne." The joy in the room was palpable. Olivia hugged each of them, Richard, Elizabeth, and Anne, feeling, for the first time in a long time, truly complete. After the session, as they left the courthouse, Richard made a surprising announcement. "This journey with Olivia has made me realize how many other children and families need help," he said. "I'm establishing the Harding Foundation for Children and Vision. We will help orphans find loving homes and support research for treatments of visual impairments." Elizabeth squeezed Richard's hand, her eyes shining with pride and renewed love. Anne, touched, offered, "I would love to help with the foundation, if you'll let me. My experience as a teacher could be useful." Weeks later, Harding Manor was decorated for a grand celebration. Colorful balloons and festive banners adorned the garden, Friends, family, and even some children from Olivia's former group home were present. At the center of it all, Olivia was radiant, dressed in a beautiful blue dress. Beside her, Richard and Elizabeth smiled proudly, while Anne watched the scene with gratitude. Richard raised a glass for a toast. To family, he proclaimed, not just to our unconventional family, but to all families that are formed through love, understanding, and forgiveness. As the party continued, Olivia found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her here. From a lonely orphan to a girl with not just one, but two loving families. She watched Elizabeth, whose vision continued to improve every day, chatting animatedly with Anne about plans for the foundation. Mrs. Davis, ever present and caring, approached Olivia with a warm smile. "Are you happy, dear?" Olivia nodded, her eyes shining. "More than I ever imagined possible, Mrs. Davis. It's like my heart could burst with happiness." As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the celebration, Olivia knew this was just the beginning. A new chapter was opening, not just for her, but for everyone around her. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Harding Foundation for Children and Vision had become a powerful force for change. Dozens of children had found loving homes, and significant advancements had been made in the treatment of visual impairments. At Harding Manor, now expanded to comfortably accommodate the entire family, Olivia, now a young woman of 17, browsed through the voluminous family journal started years ago. Each page was filled with memories, photos, and small treasures that told the story of their unique family. Elizabeth, whose vision was almost fully restored, painted a portrait of the family in the garden. Anne put the finishing touches on a new educational program for the foundation, while Richard excitedly discussed the latest medical breakthroughs with a group of researchers. Olivia smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. Her journey, which had begun with so much uncertainty and fear, had led to this moment of pure joy and fulfillment. She was living proof that love, when given the chance to flourish, could overcome any obstacle and create bonds stronger than blood or law. As the sun set over Harding Manor, bathing the scene in warm hues of gold and pink, Olivia knew that her story, the story of her family, would continue to inspire and touch lives for many years to come. It was truly a new dawn, not just for her, but for all who had the courage to open their hearts to the transformative power of unconditional love.